in whose traditional lands we are leaving today. And I would like a motion to adopt additional. Hearing none, motion to adopt.
Sure, so moved.
Dr. Jackman, second, Director Vandenberg, all in favor? Motion carried. We just received the meetings of the May 30th Creston Valley Services meeting, and we'll begin with our delegation from the Creston Valley Regional Airport. Melody, you're on, and I think probably here, but yeah, come up to the front, please. Bring them. Bring them. Bring them. William Briggs are here.
Yes,
You have the floor, so
I'm Briggs Seed. I am the newly minted president of the Creston Valley Regional Airport Society, and our ask today was directed to this board by Mr. Tierney. And what we're looking at, we've been working on a project to do a backup generator at the airport to support emergency services, our weather station, our cameras, lighting, for primarily to support our activities with interior health and the medevacs, and come and go from here to support our aging population and everyone else who needs it. That's our primary goal, is to support the medevac system and keep the airport open for recreation and RCMP, fire services. But this backup generator creates the safety network to keep the airport functional with power outage. And that's
Chair, yes, please have a seat. Sit down.
you know what, feel
Comfortable.
Should be a short presentation.
Because we will be asking you questions.
Okay.
So we could be tiring, that's what he's saying.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Well, shoot away. I'll do my best.
Yeah, we have your report in front of us, so the director will be asking some questions. Go ahead, Director Vandenberg.
So just so I understand, Brigham, is it, this generator is necessary now, was required before, it's necessary now to be able to provide servicing for IHC, and that's the Medivac? Is that something new that's happened?
Well, new and old, work in progress sort of a thing. We haven't had one before, but we experienced a power outage here in the spring. It was a 4-hour power outage. In that time frame, we witnessed Life Flight trying to come in, and they wouldn't come in without seeing our weather and our cameras and the situation they were coming into. So luckily in that incident, we were lucky enough to get things moving before they took off from Kelowna, but it definitely brought to light the importance of us having backup power.
Supplemental?
My understanding is that you had a UPS, an uninterrupted power supply for a number of hours to cover off that. I don't know what the status of that is the first question. The second question, if this is a new service that you're trying to entertain to provide with IHC, are they proposing any money in terms of the revenues and towards that capital purchase?
To my knowledge, and I can look for some backup, but to my knowledge, IHC hasn't provided us any funding for this. This is a service to the community, and it's primarily funded through the RDCK and Town of Creston. I believe that's where the majority of our funding has come from. This project actually started with emergency preparedness initiative that Bob could speak to a little bit, that we became involved with about 1.5 to 2 years ago under the Emergency Preparedness Act, or whatever is going on in that field, and then really hit home to us in regards to medevac.
So there's no UPS service?
There is a UPS there that we are currently replacing under our own funding, but it gives us about a half hour to an hour of service.
No,
No?
no, about 7 minutes. 7 minutes in a crash, we have to replace.
Oh,
So it's a short-term solution for small outages.
And this really came to light with the BC initiative for having each community to be, in case of a disaster for their community, to be prepared. And so this really actually came into light with that as well. So this is when we started last fall, trying to get this through.
Director Jackman.
Yeah, thank you. And through the chair, normally I'm trying to ask you questions first, but I want to loop in our CAO, Chief Administrative Officer, because he's been quite involved. There's a lot of changes to, well, the Emergency Services Act is changing to the point where many more things we have to do, and there's new funding streams of that. And we're just sort of seeing, in some way, maybe simplistic, I see money's lumped on us. Say, here's some money, get on with stuff. Some of we said we want staff to be paid to figure out what these changes are. How do we have to change our emergency preparation plans, all these other things, response plans, recovery plans. But in that, through the chair to Stuart, have you seen any hints of money for these other kinds of, capital projects that would make a huge difference potentially in terms of our preparedness and ability to respond to emergencies? Or is that something we can take away to UBCM or whatever and try and find out, is there money coming for that kind of works?
Yeah, through the chair, I think it's important to actually to do that. Maybe we reach out to UBCM, because the only thing we've received or been given notice of was funding around Indigenous consultation for the new Emergency Disaster Management Act, but that's it. And it has been quite surprising because of the other streams that have flowed from the provincial housing legislation and other items that have come through. So I'm surprised there hasn't been any notice of funding around emergency management. And as we get closer to the election, I see that light getting dimmer and dimmer. So it could be something where it might be beneficial to reach out to see what kind of support there could be.
And then I'm sure if there's a funding stream available, they're usually pretty fussy about fully documented sort of a business case, as my colleagues like to put it. So you have a UPS, which, I've worked on airport and hospital projects. All your UPS is good for is to let the generator fire up, stabilize, and then transfer over to the generator. It's not designed to sustain anything. It's just a very short-term interim thing. But to write all that down, that here's what you have and here's what you need. You have this, you do or don't have automatic transfer switches, you do or don't have capacity, whatever you need to make the whole system work. It's good to see a quote from a contractor that's real, like here, it's going to cost you this much money. Buy this, put it in, that's what it costs. But if it goes through a grant process, you're going to want to know sort of the whole package. That how, where it'd be located, how it'd be transferred, UPS would cover it, buffer it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so all of that would be included in this and the work that we've done in the background is we have a 400 amp service that supplies the airport. And initially, as we went into the grant application, we did an application to BCAAP, which is the airport fund, to do a 400 amp backup. And we got deferred because of the development plan that the town is working on. So we did ask that revenue source already, and we could re-ask, but this was another way to go about it.
If I might, Chair, I guess what I'm saying is that package of information, that story or narrative, a few paragraphs, that is what you'd have ready to go through a potentially new funding stream through the Union of BC Municipalities. Sometimes the provinces say, here's a big lump of money. Sometimes it'll come straight through Stewart and administration and say, you can spend this money on this. Other times the provinces say through our provincial organization, here's so many millions of dollars. And to tap into it, you need to justify the need. So the story you already wrote for the other program would be really nice to have sort of ready to go for if there's any new funding streams, because it's pretty normal. The province says, do this. And then later they'll say, oh, and here's some money. So that's, I think, what Stuart's speaking to. That as we get closer to election, like it or not, I'm sometimes maybe overly blunt, you'll get all kinds of announcements of funding streams. So we've been told to do things, but we haven't been shown the money. And of course, the answer to the province is, yeah, we can do this stuff, but it costs money. And then eventually, sometimes there's money. So you kind of want to be ready, reformat your story to match whatever might open it. And you might get 30 days to apply for funding, like very little time.
We can definitely work on that.
Director Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you very much for coming here and presenting to us. Obvious need. We're in the middle of developing a management plan for the airport, and wondered if it wouldn't be beneficial, Chair, through the chair, if we could ask GAO Moore for an update as to when we expect that plan, which will probably identify the need for this, and would be good backup information for applying for grant.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thank you very much, and through the chair.
Can we pause
so
a second?
we-
We can turn up the volume there, Mike. We can hardly hear you.
Okay,
Yes.
is that better or?
It's getting better. Try again.
Okay, well, let me know if you can't hear me.
It's not better. Just give us a sec here.
Sure.
Try again, Mike.
There.
Okay,
Right now?
can you hear me now?
Yeah, much better.
Okay. So we actually just met with the selected consultant HM Aero Consulting out of Ottawa last week, just to get a little bit of an overview of the project. The key thing for message for everybody in the room, which we're just putting together the reach out email to everybody, is that HM Aero will be in Creston the week after UBCM, which I believe is the week of September 23rd. And that's where they're going to be here to do, some open houses, talk to all the various stakeholders, meet face to face with the elected officials, the airport society, and all the individuals. But the project itself is going to take us basically to March of next year. There's a few phases to the airport master plan, or we've actually referred to as a airport economic viability plan. So the one area they're going to look at is being able to define for our elected officials what the economic and social value of the airport is to the community. We can sit here and talk about all the benefits and that, but it's being able to frame that up so that there's a really good understanding for our elected officials exactly what those values are to the community and what those investments are worth to the community from a social and economic value standpoint. As well as that, they're going to build in, look at the infrastructure that's existing. We're going to be able to create a bit of a list of what projects, what's the priorities, what's the short and long term goals in terms of asset management. And then the third thing is which and I haven't met the folks from the Airport Society regarding this, but it's really about the governance model, because the town of Creston is actually the owner of the airport and the assets. We have a contract with the Airport Society to operate, and then we have a funding stream through the Creston Valley, through the regional district shared service. And so one of the things is to be able to improve that relationship and that governance model so that items like this can get appropriately added in as an asset management for the town. And then we collectively work together to find the funding streams for that. So it's going to be kind of a sort of a three-phase approach in the master plan itself. And it's like, say, we just met with the consultants. We've just shipped them off oodles of documentation related to the airport from that we have, and like say that sort of kickoff. They're going to do an initial documentation review and be here last week of September 23rd, I believe, to be here for the whole week, to be able to do those one-on-one meetings and sort of collect some data, be able to review the airport and go through it and be able to start to build that asset management plan, if you will, of what's next and what are the opportunities. So we actually, and I did mention to them about the grant for the generator, that I knew the grant had went in and was not successful. And they're very supportive of those, that would be probably a high priority item. And so that likely will get thrown as a fairly high priority item into that master plan. But one of the phases as well that they want to do is be able to identify any immediate needs for the budget cycle for 2025. So because they're going to be here in September, and I set the early date the date of being early December to allow us, if there's any budgetary items or anything that we can work on from a grant perspective that needs to go into our 5-year financial planning for the town and the regional district is that we have that by early December, so that so again the generator could hit that target of being a high priority item. So that there is an opportunity that we could be looking at how funding that generator could take place into the 2025 budget cycle.
Director Vandenberg.
Question for Mr. Moore, CEO Moore, on this. Back to just so I better understand the services. It's good to have an airport that provides a variety of services, no doubt, particularly medical. But back to the IHC, the medevac, is that something that's been provided there for some time? Is it new? Did the community ask for it, or is it IHC that said this is a great location, we'd like to expand our operations here?
Through the chair, I'm not sure exactly how to answer that. So the emergency health services have been doing medevacs out of our community for as long as I can remember. The challenge was previous to the Airport Society, and this is really kind of kudos to the Airport Society. So prior to the Airport Society in 2009 taking on the airport, the town of Creston managed the airport. And so things like winter maintenance was not the highest priority to the town. It wasn't looked after extremely well. And so the airport wasn't utilized to its fullest or to all the opportunities. So in the wintertime, for an example, there was days that they wouldn't land or couldn't land. And that's partly due to the maintenance and as well as some of the aviation equipment at the airport, the infrastructure itself. Since then, since 2009, there's been a significant increase in using the airport for medevacs, and that's particularly because of the work of the Airport Society in upgrading the infrastructure for landing. The pilots are able to turn on the lights at night. There's all sorts of things, as well as have the caretaker out there that looks after and maintains the runway all the time. So I guess the thing is that the province has never come to us and said, hey, you need to have an airport so we can do medevacs. If the airport's there and functioning, they certainly will use it. And there's been I think the data, if we went back through to the beginning of, 2009, you would see that there's been a continuous increase in the usage of the airport for that. And that's, again, due to the shared service and the Airport Society providing that maintenance.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I guess our response is the master plan will probably give you more reason for asking this as time goes on. Hopefully there is funding perhaps available through the province in time, and through RDCK, I guess the rest of us we can't give you an answer on that today anyhow, but that will be discussed further at probably a different meeting or subsequent meeting. So for now, we thank you for your request, and we'll just have to leave it hanging over us, I guess, for the time being.
All right. Thank you.
Very much. All right, we're on the staff reports. RDCK order 2 report. John and Doctor. Go ahead, John.
Good morning.
Good morning.
If I may, before I get into the report, I just wanted to share some breaking news, some updates that we received yesterday. For anyone that watches the weather, we've got the first sort of high temperatures in the forecast over the next few days, starting on Sunday. And so you will all see from the RDCK and also from the provincial government as well, warnings about the elevated temperatures, with the guidance to really look for cool places, try to stay in the shade and avoid outside work in the hottest parts of the day. So thank you for that brief moment. I won't go through the whole of the report, but the highlights, we had one incident to report this quarter. There was a residential fire in Caslow that the ESS team supported. We supported 2 individuals there with emergency food, lodging, clothing, and incidentals. The ESS recruitment that I spoke about last time has actually gone very well. We received interest from 40 new contacts, that's 40, people that are interested in joining the team. And so the various ESS directors, that's the team leads for each of the zones, is reaching out to them and bringing them into the team, getting them set up for the training. It's too early for me to say for sure how many of those people will actually stay. There's a lot of stuff to go through the training to make sure that they're suitable, and this is definitely what they want to do. But 40 new prospects was really great news. We're very happy with that result. Partly due to that and related to that, we've got a new team which has been created in Proctor, which is, again, great news. It was an underserved area. And so we have a new ESS team which is forming and developing over there. They've actually gone through their training already. They're very keen, which is awesome. And we have contact with a team which is growing, or a couple of individuals right now in the Lower Kootenay band as well within Yakanuki. So I'm very excited to be working with them. In other news, the RDCK, we've hired an emergency program coordinator, so that this will be a person that has a similar role to mine. Ian Briscoe has transferred from another RDCK department. He's now part of the emergency management team. So we're really happy to have him. He's onboarding currently. The Emergency Operations Center grant that we spoke about last time, that application has been successful. So we have that funding approved from UBCM, which is, again, very helpful to us. The work has started on the project. So we're currently designing the exercises. There will be 2 exercises that we're going to be going out for bid on. One of them will be for the RDCK Emergency Operations Center alternate site, so our backup EOC. And an activation drill to actually simulate a transfer from the Nelson EOC to the backup EOC if we ever need to evacuate and maintain operations. Part of our business continuity as part of the emergency team. The other exercise there is going to be run probably multiple times, and it's to simulate a joint activation between the RDCK emergency operation team and our municipal partners. So some of the municipal partners are in the room already, and we'll be reaching out once we get designs put in place to plan that. And it'll be a tabletop exercise is what we're planning there. So we'll be going out to bid on that in the next few weeks once the drafts are all approved and we're good to go. That's just the highlights. The rest of the reports and the pre-reads, I'll stay if there's any questions. Thank you.
Questions? Director Vandenberg.
Hey, John. Good to see you today.
Good morning.
Fire bans and restrictions, you said that, what category are we at now? And with the increase in temperature, do you anticipate the category to change? And if it does change, does that include prohibition of fireworks?
We don't set the fire bans. Sorry, through the chair, Director Vandenberg. We don't set the fire bans. We follow the recommendations that are set by the BC Wildfire Service. There was no information given about an escalation in the fire ban status right now. The concern was more for the humans, for the people aspect due to the elevated temperatures. So this is coming from the BC HARS committee and Interior Health and HEMBC. It's the criteria they have say when there's an elevated day temperature and an elevated night temperature, it can make it difficult for people to cool down. And so because of that, there's an increased risk, particularly with comorbidities or chronic health conditions. So the warnings are really there to help people prepare themselves and to know to take the precautions and avoid the hottest parts of the day.
Stu?
Chair, just to Director Vandenberg's question, right now they're at category 3. And if they move to the next level 2, that will ban fireworks.
4.
Sorry?
That may move to 4.
No, 2. Category 2 is if category 2 ban. So the category 3 ban, it's based on the size of the fire. So a category 3 ban is you're allowed certain size brush piles. And then when they move to a category 2, that gets eliminated, it gets smaller. And you've got fireworks ban in that category 2. So to John's point, we can't predict whether or not the province would up that with the rising temperatures. I'd say it's definitely a possibility. The fact that the long weekend has passed probably lowers the chance of them doing that because of campfires, because campfires also fall into a potential ban when you get to the hotter temperatures. They'll just completely strike out campfires as well, regardless of whether they're a pit or not. But to answer your question, right now we're at 3, and if we do increase it at all, fireworks is part of that next stage.
Supplemental to that. So just want to ensure, John, you do have an open door to BC Fire, wildfire. Like, do we have a say in, we would encourage you to change your category? Is that something that's in your purview? I mean, do we as RDCK have the ability to go to the BC Wildfire Service and say, in our area, we'd like to encourage you to change your category?
I think through the chair, what we could do is contact BC Wildfire and ask them what kind of metrics they're looking at before making a decision. So are they looking at a certain overnight temperature, like John mentioned? Because that's the big thing, is that lack of cooling overnight will cause issues for fires. If we're still getting down to 11, 10 degrees at night, we're a little bit better. We're supposed to be 15 degrees overnight next week, which starts to cause a little bit of a concern with respect to any fire starts not being able to cool down overnight. So we can ask them their metrics, what they're looking at, and then see where they're going with things. But even if we did say we recommend that you put on a category 2, they're probably not going to take too much heed to that, I would say.
Right. So through the chair, it's just, it's better to be proactive than reactive when it comes to the wildfire thing. So understanding what our role is and if we can help communicate our concerns from our backyard is important to understand.
And also just further to that, the Minister, Owen Law, has regular updates in summer on the drought and wildfire situation in the province, which mayors and regional district chairs sit on. And those questions and concerns are exchanged at those information sessions regularly. And so some of the concerns that you have are communicated directly to them through these updates. And so if there's a situation where, why aren't you doing something, that those often get asked at those updates. Director Jackson?
Yeah, I was just going to add that these bans have impacts on industrial and then eventually recreational activity. So is that something we want to weigh into? Many years I've had people say, oh, they're still using chainsaws, or they're this, or they're that, or, you know, even a small burn pile. It's something that we don't have the expertise to understand all those metrics that Stu's referring to. How wet is the bush? How wet is the duff? What are the real risks? What's their long-term experience? And yeah, I don't think, other than just telling residents, don't be foolish about your activities around a campfire or obviously shooting fireworks into the bush. We don't want to weigh into stuff that in fact affects industry and recreational and tourism when we don't really know what the parameters are.
But just to Chair, just to touch on Director Jackman's point around recreation, I've been on a few of those provincial calls, and it is entirely common for the mayors on there, the chairs, to almost demand that the province shut down the backcountry. And I've yet to see them pull the trigger on that to do something that impacts that tourism recreation side of things. But it's always a big push. When are you going to shut down the backcountry? When are you going to shut down the backcountry?
So we've heard that we have an opportunity to go to UBCM in this whole emergency preparedness thing, which has been downloaded to us. But now I'm seeing that there's constraints. There's a little rubber room we get to work in. this is a bigger conversation. And if indeed the province wants us to be responsible for preparing for emergencies, that is a real life part of it. And to understand where the communication lines draw and what door we can open and when we can't open a door, we need to understand that. And so going to UBCM and talking to the minister, that was part of the conversation. That if we want to truly work together, you need to have this this well understood communication link with the variety of things that we've talked about today. But to what end? I mean, we can make all sorts of suggestions and requests, but to be not considered, why is it then that we're responsible for emergency preparedness?
Sue?
Yeah, through the chair, that last question opens up a gigantic,
Stay away from that.
we could be here for a week and I can tell you my thoughts on that. I think one thing to start with might be to take a look at what's categorized, right? Why are fireworks in stage 2? Why aren't they in stage 3? Why can't we move them back a stage so that right now fireworks would be banned? Because we've got a category 3 burn ban on. So maybe that's the conversation to have is, I would liken that to a baby step to say, look, this is something that really concerns us and we'd like it moved back. So it's not reinventing the wheel, but it's asking them just to shift a little bit because you're not talking about a huge tourism industry shift. You're talking about fireworks, which in and of itself is pretty small compared to the other things that we're talking about here.
But could have devastating effects.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Director Tierney, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, John, with the temperatures looking like they're going to be close to 40 this weekend or coming up in the next week, do you have any intention on having a cooling center available in the Creston Valley? Just for the public's knowledge?
Sorry, through the chair, Director Tierney, no, we do not have an intention to open a cooling center right now. The guidance based on the temperature range that we're seeing is to message out the precautionary information to the residents. There will be cooling spaces that are publicly available and open. The rec center where you are will be a great example of that. The Creston Library is another site. So people can build that into their plans. If they need to find somewhere they can go to cool down. But at the moment, based on these criteria, there's no intention to open up a cooling center.
Just to clarify, during certain hours of certain days, this building's open and air conditioned. The cooling center would be potential for overnight, would it? That would be somewhere where people could move into for an extended period of time, and that's not being planned right now. Is that the distinction?
To the chair, Director Jackman, that's basically the difference. A cooling center is the terminology we use where we would open a center and we would need to staff it and have it available for people to come. We're employing people on as a needed basis that can run that and operate that as a facility. But at the moment, based on these criteria, we would not open a cooling center. The potential, so that there are 2 levels that the BC House Committee has identified. The first level is a heat warning, which is what we may see in the next few days, based on the temperature forecasts that sort of start on Sunday and extend into next week. The heat warning is really precautionary, and it's that advice to people to have a plan and be resilient and be prepared for somewhere they can go to cool down. The next stage, and that's where the temperatures reach that elevated level for one day. They do not drop significantly overnight. And then the following day, it's even hotter. And then the nighttime's hotter. So that escalates over 3 days. And when it reaches that criteria, then they issue what they call an extreme heat emergency message. And that will be the trigger point then for looking at opening up cooling centres. But there's nothing in the forecast right now. All the briefing information from Interior Health that indicates that will be necessary at this stage.
So that second stage is more of a staffed housing facility continues as long as needed.
Chair, there's two people that have their hands. Mine here, there's two people that have their hands.
Amy and Mike.
Okay. I see that both Mike and the chair, Amy wants to have a hand raised. Amy, you first, Mike.
Chair, could I recommend that we offer Board Chair Amy Watson freedom of the floor? And I believe she wishes to speak to some of the items on the agenda later. So I would move freedom of the floor.
Okay. Second. All in favor? Amy, you have freedom of the floor.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to let Director Vandenberg know, you will see in this month's chair's report, I do attend those EMBC calls with the minister. And what's interesting is that in the last few years, both Minister Ma and I'm blanking on the other minister. That's terrible. They give us their cell phone numbers, and whenever there's a concern that is highlighted that we might feel as elected officials is not being addressed, I can call them on a dime, and they're very responsive. So that's just one angle from a political advocacy piece that is new and is in place. What I can tell you from the forest, I've been doing a couple of Fire Smart community recognition projects with our Fire Smart coordinator, and I'm not sure who indicated it, but currently the forest floor duff is still carrying a good level of moisture. I would anticipate in the next week after this week's heat, we will see those changes coming in. But generally the advocacy piece comes from the political end, and then the staff to staff is really the professional, what are the metrics on the ground. And so I just want to let you know, we do have that contact with them, and they've always been very responsive. In fact, Creston was one of the only areas I've called them about, and that was during the drought. So just wanted to give you that info, and I'll give you more aboard.
Hey, Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Your Worship. Through the chair, I just wanted to answer Director Tierney's question. So, the Town of Creston will be opening a cooling center at the fire hall next week. I actually had met with our emergency coordinator just yesterday, actually. And even though that we won't be receiving funding for it because it doesn't meet the heat warning criteria, we wanted to be able to offer that cooling center, and it's going to be staffed with our firefighters and work experienced firefighters through next week.
Thank you. Anything further? Thank you for your report, John.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our new business discussion item, the Water Governance Initiative. Somebody presenting on that?
Harris.
Hi there. Good morning.
Good morning.
I prepared a presentation, so I can share my screen unless, Robin, you'd like to do something different.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Can we activate the other screen as well? It's off for the gallery. Oh, there we go.
Okay, thanks, Paris. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for including me in the agenda. This morning, what I'd like to do is provide an update on the Watershed Governance Initiative, which is an initiative that's been running through the RDCK since 2018, and speak specifically to the work that we're doing currently in Yakanuki-Amakas, the Creston Valley. And there's two reports that are included in the agenda package. Both of them were submitted to CSLAC, one in 2022, and then one recently this spring, and they provide more context about what's been happening in general around the Watershed Governance Initiative, and then there's some specifics to this area in particular. And then there are some further updates that I can provide through this presentation. So there's four areas that I'd like to speak to. One is the Watershed Governance Initiative in general, just to provide some overview as a reminder for anyone who's new, and then speak specifically about three watersheds, the Goat as the primary watersheds, and then the Duck Creek and Arrow Creek, and the work that the RDCK is doing in broad strokes. And there is a follow-up report that speaks specifically to the supply questions. And then talk a little bit about the Water Sustainability Act and the work that the recent developments around that work, specifically around the Water Sustainability Plan request. And then next steps as we see them. So, and the big question, the big question that we've embraced through the Watershed Governance Initiative is, how do we influence change? My apologies, my cursor is a bit responsive. And specifically, it's how do we influence change within looking at drinking water and watershed ecology. And so this diagram just shows some of the pressures that we understand are being experienced within watersheds, and particularly drinking water watersheds. And so the tagline that we've been working with is that we're looking to protect watersheds where water sources are at risk by creating the conditions for regional collaborative decision-making. We've gone through various phases. We're now currently in phase 3 and have been here in phase 3 for a few years. In phase 2, we really focus on creating accessible and comprehensive data collection systems, and notably the Watershed Governance Initiative web map, and the ULR is provided later on in these slides, but it is available through our water tab on the website. And then also an attempt to highlight some of the work that local community groups were doing to protect their water systems, and highlighting those through a Watershed Governance Initiative story map. And this initiative to create accessible data and comprehensive data was responding to the fact that we understood that many people were concerned about their watersheds and drinking water systems, but didn't necessarily understand all of the complexities that were at play. But this is an encouragement to learn more about your watershed. Some of the specific, if moving ahead into where we're at currently and looking specifically at Yakima-Yakimaka's Creston Valley, some of the water supply considerations that we know are happening, and some of the pressures that are being experienced, include moving from a snow system, so that high level of storage in the alpine, to more of a rain system, as we experienced this year, or intermittent snow, so there wasn't the same level of storage over a period of time, to more of a rain system. And so the loss of storage that we have experienced in history, and now encountering a different type of storage, or needing to explore different types of storage. As many people know in this room, the valley has been experiencing an extended drought. 2024, I believe, is informally the 9th year of the drought. We're looking at increasing demand in terms of agriculture, in terms of increased cherry production, and in terms of increased development overall. 2021 marked a significant year in drought, notably the South Canyon Improvement District experienced a loss of groundwater, and so an indicator of that aquifer being increasingly vulnerable, and really starting to show the relationship between the watershed systems of the Goat, as it runs into both feeds the aquifer, but also the aquifer also feeding the Goat River. Yakinuki is doing extensive work and research, both modeling on the Goat, forecasting no-flow systems on the Goat, and also started looking at how to reestablish habitat systems and fisheries on the Goat. There's forestry pressures that are being experienced in the Duck Creek system, and those have been of concern for the Duck Creek Improvement District, or the Improvement District for the creek system. And then, as mentioned, low and no flow predictions. Low flow is definitely being experienced on the Arrow Creek system, and then no flow predictions within the next 10 years without an increase in demand on the Goat River system. Some of the RDCK efforts that are currently at play, again, this is just familiar, but to put it on a page. So the RDCK water systems, the Arrow Erickson water system, which also serves the town of Creston, the Lister Creek or the Lister water system. And then the report that follows, the report that is included in this is the watershed study from Duck Creek all the way to the U.S. border to determine additional source opportunities as an alternative to the Arrow Creek system, and likely with a focus on the Kootenai River system. From the community sustainability, from a broader perspective beyond supply questions, there is the partnership around the Creston Valley flood management. And so looking at assessing risk and building resilience. There's coordination with the Ministry of Agriculture on drought communications, and there was a meeting that happened in April where Water Services attended, and there was and the ministry is definitely trying to improve its communications around drought. And then there's a water sustainability plan interest with Yakinuki, which I'll speak to next. Oh, my apologies. It looks like my screen is frozen. Just one moment, please. Just going to stop sharing and then see if I can reactivate it. Apologies for the delay. My screen has frozen, so I'll just need a moment to reactivate it, unless, Robin, you're able to pull it up from your side. It'll just take me a moment to log back in.
Robin, are you able to bring it up?
Thank you very much, Robin. I think I was at slide, yeah. Thank you. And then at slide 8, please. So just as we're moving to full screen, so the water sustainability planning update is that this spring there was some activity in the, I think if you go into slideshow, 2 tabs over, and then from current slide, there you go. So this spring, there was some activity in the ongoing communications between Yakinuki Chief and Council and RDCK board and staff. We had, so in the spring, this follows on the direction that we'd received from the RDCK board to work with Yakinuki Chief and Council to request their participation in developing a water sustainability plan. So in May 2024, we, the RDCK, or rather Chair Watson and Nusukun Louis, sent a letter to the Ministry of Water, Land, Resource Stewardship requesting to work together with, namely to work with the province on water sustainability for Yakinuki and Macas Creston Valley. And a response was received, and the province, or Ministry of Water, Lands, Resource Stewardship, stating that they were pleased to see the work that had been done, both the partnership that was in place and the relationship of that in place, and the extensive understanding of the conflicts that exist in the valley, and water conflicts that exist in the valley. And then also noted that they couldn't meet with us until after the election, so in the fall, but in the meantime encouraged us to focus on resourcing, figuring out how to resource the time that's involved in this work and be quite specific about what the goals were of the work that we wanted to do. So in terms of the resourcing, from the RDCK, we applied for we prepared and submitted an application to the Watershed Security Strategy Fund, and to support work between Yakinuki and the RDCK in preparing the scope, the terms, and specifying the goals of this work. Next slide, please. You'd be able to move to the next slide, please. Okay. And we just have a few slides left, so I can just speak to it as well. There we go. So just for some background on the Ministry of Waterlands and Natural Resources, also known as Walrus. They oversee the Water Sustainability Act, for which the Water Sustainability Plan is contained, also the water objectives. And so part of the work with Yakinuki in these next steps is to determine where we want to work on water objectives and where we want to work on a water sustainability plan. And water sustainability plans, there are only two, and really only one in process at the moment. So only one has received formal direction from the province, and that's the Coxsala watershed in the Cowichan Valley. And it's preceded by a government-to-government partnership between Cowichan tribes and the province. And then in that case, Cowichan Valley Regional District provides a supporting role. And so in terms of next steps, it's it's important at this time really to learn about the history and the region in terms of understanding the science and what's happening. And then, as mentioned, work with Yakinuki from our perspective, from the RDCK, to work with Yakinuki on the term, scope, and intent of the project, and then begin to engage with residents, but seeing this as a multi-year initiative. And so engagement with residents may not happen for a while. And then the last slide is just a slide to any residents who are interested in what they can do. And this information is also available on our website. Thank you very much.
Paul, you.
Vandenberg, go ahead.
Paris, thank you so much for that presentation. You do such a lovely job of presenting that, which is relevant. I appreciate that. The work of the Watershed Governance Initiative, it's the proper direction. Water is a huge concern for Creston and Creston Valley. We need to know what our options are going to be for our future. This is one part of it. I guess, being familiar with the Windle Irrigation District improvement districts, they should be partners at the table on this. And more specifically to Duck Creek, it's the whole logging thing and the ability to, in good faith, put in a good governance system. But if we have no influence or effect over logging, then it's counterintuitive. Logging is important because it affects the ability to control our fire loads. But it has to be very well, very carefully done. And watersheds is not a place where you can just blanket log in. So I guess this is nothing new to you, but for the benefit of the people that are in this room right now, it's something that is important to us, that whatever we're doing to work forward and get agreement with the ministry cuts itself short if we can't have a good discussion around the negative impacts of logging in watersheds. I just want to bring that to the front. The second part is we're working on an alternative water project for the valley. And maybe this question is more to Director Jackman, who is very in tune with this. But how does that work line up with the work of Yakanuki and the Water Governance Initiative?
And actually, well, I was going to say, hopefully Paris will remain for the report from Eileen, which is coming up shortly, and all of these things dovetail, right? If I can make any kind of comment, on the one side, what Paris just explained is we have more demand, more people, more agriculture for less water. That's kind of what it's looking like. So everybody over a wide area has to know how that's going to be shared or governed or what's going to happen. On the other side, we don't actually have an intrinsic shortage of water. There's a fairly big amount of water flowing past us all every year. But if you want to tap into that, that's no small thing. We're looking for little tiny water license adjustments. I can name 3 water license applications to the province that impact 2 of our regional district water systems that are not going anywhere. One is 4 years and 5 months in. And that applicant has been told they're not on the list yet because they don't tick the right boxes. So the one, we have to understand our need for water and our future potentially dire consequences if we don't figure this out. And the other, right now, we got to start talking about where else can we get water without waiting a decade to get some kind of approval. And to me, that's the second project. Like, we know where there is water. We know where we don't need to treat water to put it on fruit trees or crops or whatever. So we got to look at them together. And sorry, Paris had better thoughts than I had probably, but through the chair to Paris, you are going to listen in to the next presentation, are you not?
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, and Uli's just come online as well. But yes, and we do work closely. So I work with Eileen. I'm familiar with the project, and Yakanuki is one of the partners on the project as well for the alternative water supply. If I could also, Chair, also just speak to 2 of the other points mentioned by Director Vandenberg.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So in terms of forestry, indeed, it's one of those, industry as a whole is one of the significant pressures on the watersheds. We also know that there's significant mining activity in the Creston Valley, or at least mining interests in the Creston Valley. And so it's all industrial activity, but forestry is notable as it increasingly becomes closer to the human interface and to drinking water systems. Ktunaxa Nation have created the Ktunaxa Forestry Standards, and they're quite progressive standards. And so it's just an example of where we can see leadership from both Ktunaxa Nation Council and from Yakanuki around how to integrate and work with all interests of what's happening in our watersheds and do it differently. And I'll just finish by saying that again, if we look at the Cowichan Valley or the Coxsalo watershed and what they've done there, they have 3 levels of currently. So they're about to work on their water sustainability plan. But prior to that, they have agreement to do a watershed plan, and that supersedes the water sustainability plan and is much more encompassing, because the water sustainability plan is very specific to drinking water and watershed concerns, whereas the watershed plan is that the whole of watershed and would be involving the Ministry of Forests at that point and industry interests as well. And then prior to that is the government-to-government agreement between Cowichan tribes and the province to work together. So there's, just to say that there's lots of ways that this can proceed, and there's lots of interest. And part of the work and part of the complexity of this work is both taking into consideration everything, but also narrowing it down so that we can be effective at something. And so through the process of identifying the scope and the terms, it's working through that process of how do we address everything, but also take action. Thank you.
So Amy, you had your hand up, and I wasn't ignoring you, but your hand is not up anymore. Was something you wanted to add, though?
Oh, no, it's okay. Thank you, Mayor DeBoon. I think Paris kind of covered it. I was just going to let Director Vandenberg know that when we met with Yakanuki, it was about a year ago at this time, it was the first weekend of July, I believe, to initiate this conversation. The forestry component was really, it was quite heightened. The council there is working quite extensively with staff to review the forestry practices from a watershed perspective. So Paris was more articulate in the actual details on that, but I just wanted to let you know they're very much involved in looking at a landscape level type of management, and they have staff working on that as well. So we were talking about sharing data and making sure whatever we had available through our watershed work and other data would be equally shared with them. So they seem quite keen on ensuring that those logging practices do not work against the initiatives of trying to ensure there's enough water. So just want to let you know that part of the meeting about a year ago.
And from this report, we have two options. And option one is that the RDCK board requests that the province order a water sustainability plan be developed in the Creston Valley in partnership with the RDCK and the Yakanuki people. And the other one is no further action. So just want to. Right.
So through the chair, everything in this report that's been recommended to select to the board has already been passed. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We don't need to deal with those.
No, it was there for information for you.
Okay. Good. All right. Anything further on this? Move on to our next agenda item then, which is the discussion on the sub-regional approach to housing.
Chair,
Yes.
would it make more sense to reorder the agenda and have Eileen's presentation right now? People just heard about some water concerns and demand and this and that, and then there's an alternative. So I would propose that we reorder the agenda to deal with item 8.5 at this time.
I would agree with that, and that way we don't have to keep Paris online forever as well. So if we can do that, we will go then to Eileen with the discussion item, Creston Valley Alternative Water Supply Study. Eileen, are you available right now?
Uli.
Through the chair, yeah, Uli and myself. I'm Chris Gannon. I'm the new utility service manager from Houston. And Eileen's this week. I can certainly explain and summarize the Creston Valley Alternative Water Supply Study. So in a nutshell, the Creston Valley Alternative Water Supply Study is a multidisciplinary first stage in identifying potential sustainable sources of supply for agriculture in the Creston Valley. Study areas generally from down to the U.S. border, the ALR areas included in that zone. I mentioned that it's a multidisciplinary study. Associated Engineering was awarded the project to lead mid-April. They bring a suite of engineers, hydrologists, agrologists, and agricultural economists to really help analyze what future and current impacts there are on agricultural water demand in the valley, as well as look at the cost benefit to providing a secondary source of water. At the end of the study, which is scheduled to end by end of December this year, with a final report, we're looking to have a prioritized list of potential sources of water for agriculture in the Creston Valley, along with very high-level estimates of the infrastructure required to potentially bring those sources of water to the users that need them. So looking at requirements for transmission, storage, potential treatment as well. Again, high-level costs. This is the first stage in a three-stage funding project, partially funded by the BC government with the Investment Agriculture Foundation. Stage one, which we're at, or stage three, sorry, which we're at right now, is a desktop study, again, to dig into the details of these potential sources of water and really shortlist what we'd like to move forward for the next stage of the funding program to really move this forward. The schedule for the project, we were looking to hold a public meeting sometime late summer with the delivery of a draft report mid-fall And again, that final report will be available by the end of December of this year. Certainly available to take any questions from members.
Director Jackman, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And through the chair, Chris, as you said, there's many phases or stages. And I don't think it's going to begin to resonate on people until we talk about the economics of it. So I don't know a whole lot about this, but I do know in the Okanagan today, they harvest whatever fruit, whatever they crop, grapes, whatever it is, and then they cut their watering to what they think is the minimal amount to not harm next year's production. And they know that if they decrease their watering and they don't get to a certain state into the fall and into the dormant season, they'll get less yield next year. I don't think we want to be in that situation, but there's an economic impact to everybody in agriculture if you are stressing your plants, or if there's a drought, or whatever you need to do to make sure you have year-over-year continuous, reasonable or optimal production. So there's an economic aspect to that. And there's an economic aspect to taking water out of the arrow, filtering it with a system that every gallon of water you push through that trashes the membranes. That's just the way it happens. Filtering it all, silt, dirt, small particles, chlorinating it, and then dumping it on the dirt, right? As an agricultural use. There's a cost to that. And it doesn't get cheaper year over year. It gets more expensive. On the other hand, we're not going to get another substantive water supply without potentially tens of millions of dollars. Like, it's not going to be cheap. So I'm just going to say, oh, we can't afford this. Or can we not afford to not do this? I mean, that's the question in my mind. That's why we're not going to wait a decade till we have the farmers saying, oh, I'm down to 40% productivity. I'm closing the farm. I'm giving up, walking away, subdividing, put houses there. So at what point do we see, right now, Associated is going to talk about where the water is and where it isn't. What point will we see where the money's at? Because that's where we're going to get traction. If we're going to have public meetings, I don't want people to say, oh, they're going to talk about creek flows and hydrological graphs and stuff I don't really care about. When are we going to talk about the money? Is that going to be talked about at all this year, or is that going to be next year?
So this first phase of the study will look at that.
The money.
That's part of it. Yeah, I mean, the hydrology is, of course, kind of the baseline of what's a sustainable source. How do we reduce impacts on sensitive sources of water that we currently draw from? But again, that cost benefit analysis, and also looking at scenarios of potentially different crops, different land uses over time, and that impact on water demand is all part of the study. So we expect that information to be provided at a high level in that draft report in the fall. That information may be, being developed for the first public meeting at the end of the summer. But yeah, we'd expect that information to be more fleshed out part of the plan in mid-fall.
Supplemental then. I love that we press that point. We're going to start talking money. Apparently, we talk about how we're going to change how we're spending your money, brings 300 people up to this building from time to time. So now we're talking about what might be another substantive way in how we take and spend your money. So hopefully people pay attention early on and not tell me years later, why are we doing organics diversion when we sat in this room like 5-6 years ago and talked about it. And by the time we finally did it, a couple of years ago, people said, where did this come from? And I said, I sat in this room, almost in this chair, and talked about it. So let's stress the money, because apparently that's what people want to hear about. Thanks.
Just to clarify a comment that Chris made. Part of this report will include that which is coming to us hopefully for December, cost benefit analysis. That is the numbers, but you threw in high level. I don't know that you can have a cost benefit analysis at a high level, can you? I mean, what kind of conversation are we going to have in December if it's, I don't know what high level means, Chris.
We're talking, in the industry, we call it the Class T cost estimate. So that planning level cost estimate, just kind of doing a desktop study. We're not dropping, test pits and test wells to look at, transmission line routes and things like that. So again, those costs of the infrastructure required will be, at a unit cost level that are industry standard for the area that we're in. the cost benefit for the producers, so the agricultural community. I think will probably be a little bit more dialed in costs. We're not talking pure infrastructure there. We're talking, agricultural costs that are maybe a little more developed and less uncertainty, I guess, than building infrastructure through physical routes.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's something that we can dig our teeth into. And just want to note, we should probably include this on our action plan. Because I think it's a pretty keen conversation that we want to have. We don't want to lose it. We don't want to hear that it's being bumped. What we do want to hear is it's ready sooner than not. And on the action plan, we can keep an eye on it. Thank you.
All right, anything further on this?
Got Uli online, Chair.
Uli, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to this. Getting to cost will be a multi-stage approach. We need to know, right now this study will say who needs water, what is the growth, what's the potential, who may be interested, and make certain assumptions of users. Ultimately, when we have a very high level cost, we need to go back out and say, at this level of cost, are you interested to be part of it? And then we may have to actually scale it down. I mean, if the agricultural sector says this water is too expensive, or we only are interested if we have 90% paid by grants, then we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to apply for grants and. So there's many levels that contribute to this picture that we need to determine before we can get anywhere closer to a harder cost or even consider design for a system.
Director Tierney?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think part of the conversation needs to be with the farmers. Well, there's example Canyon Improvement District. They're regularly pumping 175 gallons a minute for most of the year. For 3 months, they go up to 1,000 gallons a minute. The cherry industry takes a lot of water. Very fortuitously, many of the farmers have realized what they're up against, and there was hundreds, if not thousands, of cherry trees pulled last fall and put into other crops. They know themselves that there has to be some change. So I guess all I'm saying is, we've got to include the farmers in the conversation about whether there are crops that will be more friendly to the water systems in the valley.
Okay, that's a point taken. And we move on to our next item, which is back on the agenda.
Chair, would we want to stand up and take a stretch?
Yes, let's take a 5-minute recess, sorry.
Sure. Thank you. Or I'm going to get coffee.
Recording stopped.
Yeah, I was like, should I offer to get him one? You sticking around or you heading out?
We had this conversation in 2016.
You know what local government's about.
Larry Binks in the room.
You don't look good. 30%.
Recording in progress.
Going to be able to have attainable or achievable or affordable housing by asking a developer to do it. By having us as a housing corporation, the idea of profit is not something that we are aiming towards. We're aiming for a sustainable project where the rents pay the mortgage. We don't have a bunch of investors that want to line their pockets this way. So we're hoping that when we develop these, rent stays reasonable and costs, and so that we can provide housing for people that is achievable. So that's the strategy we are working on. Once we have a plan developed, we just go to put it up to bid to developers, and off we go, hopefully. So we are walking towards that, and we know it takes time, but our goal is to have something clearly in the works by the end of this year, and then another project probably next year. So we're doing what we can there. I think one of the barriers we see probably sub-regionally is the ALR and their regulations, how that impacts extra housing, as in what you're allowed on agricultural land. For us as a community to expand, to obtain some of the agricultural land we need to expand is another challenge. So there are several things that complicate this, but that if we can address some of those issues, at least we have some more land to build on. And again, people that with agricultural land, if they can find a way to have acceptable extra housing on their land to increase housing, it's another challenge that really has to be addressed because of all the problems we have with housing.
So that's an opportunity for us to go to UBCM and say, asking for an opportunity to relax some of the ALR. Because there are some areas within the ALR that is, you're not going to make any money raising lots because that's all you can grow there.
Yeah.
But it's still within the boundary and it's restricted.
Yeah.
So the suggestion that the town of Creston is putting forward deals with a certain demographic of public.
Yeah.
And that's necessary. But there's still the opportunity, there's still people that could be moving in, building, and is there building stock in the valley for the other demographics? Not sure, but I think that that's an important consideration. I will say that in my travels, when I go out into the community and Fruitvale and Grand Forks and Castlegar and that sort of thing, they don't seem to be having a problem building. There's buildings going up all over the place. And I kind of wonder, why are we not the same? Why aren't we celebrating the same way? That's why I brought up the question about barriers. And so it might be land stock, it may be ALR barriers, that sort of thing. And I will point out as well that in our Bill 44 amendment to our OCP, that we, and essentially it was a change in terminology for the most part, but we did put a further restriction in, and that is the addition, it's called number 2B, that regardless of the lot that we're talking about, it's still restricted to 2 units only. And to me, that doesn't make any sense. I kind of wonder why we're restricting to 2 units and forcing people then to subdivide, throwing them into another 6 months of activity. I need to talk with our planners to find out what is the advantage of forcing people to subdivide. Why don't you just, if the land can support through water and sewage and that sort of thing, multiple buildings, then let it be. Why are we restricting it to 2 and then forcing a subdivision? I see as another barrier. And I don't know that it meets the intent of Bill 44. That's the question that I'm pursuing currently right now.
So before you start, we just had the discussion about the study for water here, and the cost benefit analysis of providing a great deal more water to our agricultural area to produce cherries. So if the cost benefit analysis comes back and says that would be great, but the cost of that is extremely high, maybe we need to find another use for that land, which again could be housing. All they need is domestic water and don't have to apply thousands of gallons onto the land to produce cherries, then perhaps we should be looking at what this report tells us and considering how we can use that land in a different way that doesn't take so much water, and people can actually increase housing and only use domestic water, which is already provided. So there are I think, things that as we go down the road and we look at what some of these reports tell us, I think it gives us more of a basis to make decisions on what to do in agricultural areas. Director Jack?
We scheduled 2 hours for this conversation. There are so many layers, and yeah, this is just going to be a cursory thing that what are we going to do? And I can think of 2 or 3 things I'd like to look at in terms of planning staff right today. I guess the first, I'm really cautious about saying that if agriculture today isn't economical or viable or cost water, this and that, that's the reason to move to housing, because it doesn't mean cherries have a very high value as a crop, period. They're like, we bought cherry juice when Susan and Gary Snow used to produce that as neat little, little things to give away as something interesting. There's a different nutritious product, but trying to produce, ship, and consume fresh fruit is not the future for food sustainability unless you're only consuming it locally, no shipping involved, right? There's so many other things you can grow, root crops and stuff like that. Nobody's tried. Well, quotas are part of the barriers there. But so I'm super cautious about saying, well, if the farming it today isn't working very well and water is going to become its own barrier, then we'll move to housing. I'd far rather take the approach that Mike Snosnowski took in the East Kootenay, and I thought we were going to do here, and that conversation just kind of withered and went away. So he invested wherever he gathered the money. So he's Area A, so rural Elkford, Sparwood, Fernie, and through there. And he didn't run previous election. He looked at the maps that ALR were based on that came from aerial photographs, and some of them were photos BC from the 50s. So if you'd logged the valley and halfway up the hillside, and from an aerial photograph, possibly black and white in stereo photogrammetry, it looked like, well, you could put a crop on there. It was added to the ALR in the early 70s. None of this was done with LiDAR. None of it was done with something really serious about, is it stony, rocky ground? All the ground was categorized, but the basic maps were established based on aerial photos. So what Mike said is, okay, and we've had this discussion about Tagum and parts of Area E over and over and over. So what is the real terrain? Is there water? And what's the soil? So is it too steep? Is it too rocky, or it won't hold water? It drains too quickly, and seasonally you don't have any water, that kind of stuff. So what Mike's area did was he said, well, you got a valley bottom that's probably pretty obvious without doing a lot of study that you can grow something here, a reasonable cost, and not damage your equipment trying to till the land or do whatever. As you start to climb the hillsides, it's not really viable. And you can tell because none of the farmers are farming the top third of their property. It goes up the mountainside. So he wanted to do a blanket ALR exclusion based on certain criteria. And then that would be the area available for whatever. Now, we've worked against that a little bit with our residential farm footprint because the less farmable areas, area at the back of the lot away from the road, we've said you can't have a road to get up to the top, right? So we have some conflicting stuff. But that's something we could do with some of our farmland, do that reassessment. And to do it as a whole regional district, we haven't gone anywhere. We've had no traction in my mind. We've seen RDI do a lot of assessments on what is being farmed, what's not being farmed, and sort of a little bit of information on how good is the land and what's the lost opportunity. We could do that. That's something we'd say we're going to work on that. Before we talk about houses on farms, talk about farming on farms and those barriers. Like you can't grow carrots or whatever if you need a quota. The other sides of it, I worry a little bit about sort of there's like Bill 44, I tend to agree. I've heard odd comments, and this is why I said I was taking a leap of faith with the adoption at the board meeting, that have we become more restrictive? Because I've been touting for a couple of years now what I've heard at AKBLG and other sessions we've gone to that you guys have paid for us to go to and listen, what's going on? Let the housing and development be based on what the land will support, what Director Vandenberg just said, and I've said that so many times over the last couple of years. Having an R1, R2, R3, R4 makes so little sense. You might have a suburban residential if you have domestic water and or sewage system, and then you end up with small lots and you don't get a lot of neighbors upset with each other. I get lots of calls from Wendell, people upset with each other because they have domestic water but not septage. Some of the septic systems are failing, and in the spring when the water is running across your lawn because you have high water table, somebody can smell something, and then all of a sudden you get phone calls and they're health issues, but guess who they phone? But beyond that, R2, R3, R4 makes so little sense. And whether even zoned or not, like the land use designations based on R1, 2, 3, 4 for OCPs, and some of it's zoned, some of it's not. People are still doing whatever they want. There's trailers and houses and huts and stuff going up. We'll go for a tour. You can all do the tour. They're doing what they want. I mean, our building manager and his previous, they're just doing what they want. Because if they come to us, they'll see barriers. They want that third little unit. Now they can only have two, so they just do it. So I am worried we become overly restrictive. The old concept of cluster development was sort of, to me, based on, and Area A had a cluster development, still has, I guess, hasn't been wiped out yet. It's been suggested, cluster development permit area. And that what would that land support? The subdivision point, that's great, because right now we're telling people you can't subdivide unless you base it on type 1, which people aren't building. They're building type 2 systems because they work better. We were worried a decade ago they wouldn't be reliable, but they are reliable. So again, that's another barrier. It's in a document that we have that we say, oh, you can't do this. And so maybe they would have subdivided and had 4 houses where there's 2, and it might have been viable and been good for those people and supported the housing needs. But we put 2 or 3 roadblocks in front of people, and then they just shrug. So yeah, there's lots of layers here. I'd better quit because I got more scribble notes here. But the farming, I would rather, if we're going to do anything serious with farming, maybe look at what East Kootenay did. Area A, Mike Snosky was the director at the time. Should we be doing that again? Assessing what percentage of existing farm doesn't make sense in terms of terrain, slope, too wet, too dry, too rocky, and maybe, you know, back out of the thing, look at that land base, and then go back into the conversation. Where do you put houses?
I think we need to also determine what's acceptable land use. And an agricultural operation often has associated buildings with it for equipment and other things.
Always.
I don't see a reason why they couldn't build an upper story and have rent the lofts and things like that, because we've already got the footprint of the building, but we're not permitting housing above that, and we're not actually encroaching on any other land. So I think it becomes a question of how flexible can you be within the parameters of how you operate. And I think that's a question that we need to address further, because it does solve some of the rural housing needs. And again, we have the footprint of a building there. So it's a fair way to increase housing without approaching an agricultural land. We're not doing that.
But the footprint of residential increase without increase in the physical footprint increases the need for septage and secondary septage, and sometimes a different kind of driveway and parking and storage separate from agricultural. So there's always an impact. Sorry, Chair, I'm just jumping in.
No, there's pros and cons to that, but just seems one method that could be used better. Anything further we want to add to this? Director Vandenberg?
This is a necessary conversation to have. It's difficult to have it at the board setting. This is a subcommittee in which we get to talk about these sorts of things, and I'm glad that we are. This session is recorded. I would like to have this summarized, because I think we need to, there's opportunities to move forward. We just haven't decided how we're going to do that yet. We've identified some things, but I don't want this conversation lost just without it being summarized, so that we can actually act and move forward.
Director Jackman?
This just jumps to a little bit of a quick conversation Director Kearney and I had about the types of farming operations we might expect. As we see Southern Alberta, and probably a huge swath of the prairies going industrial. Families don't farm anymore, they lease land, somebody has all the combines, all the equipment, they can get ahead of the hailstorm, ahead of the weather, optimize yield. That's great, that model works. But that's could either be where we head or not where we head. But around that conversation, in the past, we've invited the chair and CEO of the Agricultural Land Commission to have conversations. We had Commission Chair Bullock here in the past. I don't know if we talked to him in this town. He was a guest at AKBLG in some of our conversation. We sat down in Nelson and talked to him with other directors about, here's what we've done, like our residential footprint thing. Here's what we look like. Here's what our housing looks like. And just ask them straight out, because they keep changing the rules, either themselves or they're told by the province to change the rules. Just to have an open conversation. What does the commission see in the next decade? And would we fit that? This, what I've always called the small lot farming. So you do allow a subdivision, but you really do restrict. You can't have a 6,000 square foot monster house in the middle of it. Residential farm footprint is taking care of that to a degree. But would we want to go further and say, well, you can subdivide further if you self-impose further restrictions? You're going to have more restrictions on the amount of housing or residential related development, but you're going to have the opportunity for a little 1 acre market garden and maybe a small crop in the back of whatever, whether it's fruit trees or something going on, or maybe just a pasture. But we can ask the Agricultural Land Commission to come and sit with us. The last time I think we had a really good heart-to-heart, we did it at Aquam, at the St. Mary's Resort in that big white tent building. We talked then about compliance and enforcement, the struggles they were having and stuff like that. So we could also wrap something like that into it, maybe. Because I haven't heard much about compliance and enforcement issues, but we've had at Creston Valley Ag Advisory Committee, members of that committee concerned about somebody's doing something that's non-compliant, and they just keep doing it. So a couple of conversations we could hold if we invited them.
Director Van.
I would be in agreement with what Director Jackman is saying, is to invite representatives of the ALC to have this conversation. Perhaps these notes that we collect as context before they arrive, so we can make a meaningful conversation. One of the other frustration points that I see is we get applications from our constituents to do whatever they want with their land, what they have in mind with their land, rurally. And they go through this whole process of working with their staff and then going through APAC and working with the Agricultural Advisory Commission and then present to the board, and we support that. So all these layers of support, people that are in the backyard saying, we would support this, to have the ALC turn it down. Like, that is confusing and frustrating. And what is the rationale behind that sort of thing? That would be another interesting point of conversation that I would like to have. Is it just simply because it's the way the legislation is? Well, it's time to maybe modernize that legislation. And that should become a priority. If indeed the province is serious about housing, okay, well, there's a lot of aspects to it. So let's help them to achieve that goal.
So just to further this down, I think our desire here to start the discussion here, have the Agricultural Land Commission come, take it to the AKBLG and perhaps a resolution to UBCM that address this problem so that we can take it as far as we can in the different steps. Because if we don't get somebody to change what they're doing, we just spin our wheels. And so I guess we have to start some sort of way to get that done. That's kind of what you're asking for.
I think so.
Yeah.
But I would suggest we don't provide a direction to staff to set up an invitation to the Agricultural Land Commission yet. We think about this a little bit. What specifically would we want to talk about? I would like to have this flushed through the Agriculture Advisory Committee before we actually talk to the ALC. What's on their mind? If they were able to have the chair and CEO of that commission sit in the same room with them, what 3 things do they want to talk to them about? What 2 or 3 things do we want to talk about? And just kick it around from that aspect. So, we'd go on the Ag Advisory agenda first or next, I would think, then back here.
And if I may add, we do have that's and I agree with that. But when we do have a meeting upcoming with the Ag Advisory, so that would be the direction of staff right now, is to ensure that that discussion gets put on the agenda.
Steve is on the head, the director, so.
It's the 15th, I get. No, that's area A. When is the Ag Advisory? We just saw one.
Saw one, yeah. Roger, do you recall when the next?
They haven't set a date yet. There, so much work right now that they're trying to find time. They haven't.
Who establishes it, works at the agenda, is that part of your job?
It's not done by she,
It's Melissa.
I do believe they're have a meeting before the.
Sadie.
Sadie. Okay.
Well, this meeting, we, by the way, to request that he gets on their agenda.
She'd send that to the chair, to Randy Meyer, I would think, is a request to be part of the agenda, setting the agenda. Perfect.
Step one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anything else on this? Nothing, we will go to the financial plan amendment for the Lister Cemetery.
Okay, I just thank you for staff for drafting this up. Basically, identifying something that I thought had already happened, and that's moving the $3,500 from accumulated surplus to the 2024 financial plan for the S-174 cemetery, for the Lister Community Cemetery. They have submitted all their reports that were not submitted in the past, and we're all up to date. And so I believe this is just.
Well, I'll second the motion as per the agenda.
You want me to read out that?
We all have to.
If you move, I'll second it, and for discussion.
Just for clarity, the Lister does fall under 174 Creston areas A, B, and C. And so is this in the budget or additional to the budget?
No, it was, yeah, I noticed at our last board meeting that the motion to move it into the 2024 financial plan didn't take effect. The $3,500 is still sitting in accumulated surplus. So this is just formalizing, moving the money from surplus to the financial plan. The money was there, it's just sitting in surplus.
So through the chair, last year, they were not paid their funds because they didn't submit their documentation. Joe, through the budget process, asked the committee what to do with those funds. It was put aside into surplus, not put in the grant line, so there was no presumption that they were going to get paid until such time as they submitted their past documentation. They've since done so, moving it from surplus into the grant item, and then it'll be paid once they submit this year's documentation, and we get our tax revenue on August 1st. But this will have to go to board.
Okay. All
It doesn't show during the surplus.
in favor? Motion carried.
This is 2024 year.
I think we'll reorder the agenda once more because I can see that in the way you're raising. Some of these discussions will go on. And it's an item if we want some to go. See, come up and then we'll just discuss your.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, directors and staff. I have Carol Hushcroft with us. She is our treasurer. You have questions?
Well, we asked you to just provide a little more information on what your on capital planning and other grants that you have applied for, whether you've asked community service clubs for any money. But just if you could just answer those questions, then we'll consider the properly addressed.
So the first one is, have we applied anywhere else? Yes, we have. We applied for this project through the Creston Community Foundation Fund, and we were denied because their focus this year was on climate action projects, and this one didn't qualify. So we were turned down there. We have looked to the headquarters of the region to see if there's anything there, because we have had a loan through the region before, which is now paid off, but we have done that in the past. And that was not a possibility at this time either. I believe Carol can answer the previous grant application question.
I just became the treasurer in April, so I've been going back in the books. I cannot locate where we've ever received money. I can't guarantee that we didn't, but I've gone back to 2018 and I see no grants or any kind of financial help given to us from the regional district, yes.
Director Jackman.
Yeah, thank you. I remember walking through the building. We talked about the roof. We talked about the upstairs, maybe some renos and gyprock and stuff, but we spent most of the time in the basement level looking at the kitchen. I don't remember exactly how far back that was, but if there was a regional district grant that I made a recommendation for, it's probably around the kitchen upgrades. I don't know if you went back that far. There's a kitchen, and then there's the second back entry door, and there's some stuff way in the back corner, that little bit of a reno there. So it could have been a decade or more back.
Yeah, must have been.
Well back. I will say, just so everybody else knows, that Melissa had sent this to me and bounced back and forth. And I said, I said, go ahead and recommend 2,000 from Area A towards the current grant project. She asked me, is this time sensitive? Because she could ask for a late edition for June. I said, no, because I don't know where anyone else is. I said, put it on July. So in the July board meeting in 2 weeks, there is 2,000 from Area A rec. Just so you guys know.
Much appreciated. Through the chair, we were asked also, what is our ability to put together funds for these kind of repairs? And there's really very little ability to do that, because we're required to give out 85% of all the income that we take in. They allow us to keep 15%, which is enough to cover our utilities and taxes and staffing. But there's no extra money for funds for revitalizing the building, basically. I don't know why that system is set up that way. I guess they expect us to look for grant money. I don't know what else we could possibly do. What we are doing, though, I can tell you, is we have reached out to other service groups in the community to see if there's any way we could share our building and get a little support that way. It's a desperation move. We don't want to do this, but there is interest in the community from some of the other groups who are managing older buildings themselves, looking at selling those and looking for other facilities. Some of the groups require larger meeting spaces. We'd like to offer our building to them in one form or another. So there is a proposal that we may have talks with some of these groups. The issues, of course, is that our building is not ideal for any of them. Our hall, the upstairs level that Gary is referring to, is in need of an air conditioning system. We had a swamp cooler system, which is gone, lived out its life. So now we're looking at some kind of air conditioning system. Now we are talking to Fortis, possible rebates and things to help us get those things done. One of our major issues, though, is the roof. It's a flat roof. It's in need of repair. We expect leaks coming fairly soon. The cost of that project is tremendous. We have no idea how on earth we would do it unless we partner with somebody else to help share the cost of that. So this is all in the process, but our board is relatively new. And we are just struggling to find emergency solutions to some of these issues. I do have an electric door getting installed this week. We've needed that for a long time because of accessibility issues for some of our members who are mobility challenged. And that one we get a grant.
Dr. Vadberg, you have a question?
Yes, I just find it very challenging that your mandate requires you to redistribute it back into the community, 85% of the funding. Going back to the community, that's great. But in spite of having to maintain an asset, like that just seems to me as being counterintuitive in terms of the longevity of that facility. It seems to me that there's an opportunity to address a letter to the head of whoever makes these decisions to qualify that, because you're not alone then. There's going to be other assets out there that are just slowly going to dissolve because they can't reserve any money, put money in reserve for capital asset costs. And I just find that extremely odd.
Through the chair, we know regions are closing all of the time. It's a combination of lack of membership, lack of veterans that have survived, and cost of maintaining buildings, as are all our churches and communities struggling with the same issues. When you're a not-for-profit organization, you do have a lot of problems with aging infrastructure. So like other regions, we are hoping to hang on. That's about all we can do. And we try to increase membership. Membership is open to anyone. You don't have to be a family member of a veteran or anything anymore. Anyone can join. So we are working on that. Memberships are $50 a year. We don't get to keep all of that money either. And it's not enough to sustain just our memberships. They have to actually come in, spend money, and support our events. That's happening to some degree, but not nearly enough.
On membership, we keep 8%, $50. That's it.
And the rules for funding, are they established through the Royal Canadian Legion as an
Yes.
entity? It's not through your own local bylaws?
No. It's a national.
Okay. Dr. Jackson?
Good, thanks. So this has to just be a matter of an accounting solution, because your profit, there's a gross profit, net profit, right? So if you're only taking $10,000 and you have some obvious expenses for paid staff or whatever, miscellaneous and input costs of whatever, whether it's for serving food, whatever, of 3,000. So you could say, well, maybe we have a profit of 7,000, but you don't. So you have to have an expense on the expense side, the contribution to the reserve for long-term, capital asset management. So if it's just an accounting line or two, that you're showing the appearance of a profit is not there. You're giving 85% of it away. No organization just looks at their gross profit or the simplified profit. What checks do we write this month and how much money came in the door? You always put something aside. So if you put the real numbers in that reserve for these, whether it's short or longer term upgrades, maintenance and renewal of the building, your profit won't be very much at all. And that's what you have to have clarified, I think, through the national group, is what is everyone else showing as an actual expense? Because it's a real expense. Running this building is a cost every day as it ages. And so we have a proposal to put money aside to cover that expense. I can give you the staff report from us 2 weeks ago that says we're not doing it yet. But it's just accounting. How do you account for money in? And your profit is much less than what I think somebody's expecting to get 85% of. They have to clarify that. What are eligible expenses.
I have been sending, we have to have an audit, but I have to send it in. Most months, we have a break even or lose money. The money that we are getting in, it goes into a trust account. We don't write anything on those trust accounts. They're checks to Poppy Fund, that's money that's not ours, even though it shows on our balance sheet. That's not our money. We have 3 different trust accounts. And that's where we write all the checks for community bursaries, the community, the food bank. The Legion supports a lot in this community. And if we don't function, that money doesn't come.
Yeah, we really did just make a decision on this, and I think it's been this is the second time it's been to our meeting, and I think we kind of know what we want to do anyway.
Well, Area A is already recommending a portion of that.
Area B
is arbitrary.
But right there as well, so.
Area C will say that. I was going to say pull the trigger, but I shouldn't say that. Area C will participate.
But Chair, it really is a delegation, so you wouldn't have any recommendation recorded here based on what the delegation request is. But we already have from Melissa the question mark, and if provided we tell her by Monday 4:30, you have boarded.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking this question, because I've seen that email this morning.
Yeah,
Monday, yeah.
And we'll be responding to that email. Sounds pretty good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We appreciate your efforts to help us out again.
Yeah.
We'll struggle on. Thank you for your advice.
Thanks.
Just through the chair, category 2 fire ban effective tomorrow in new Southeast Fire Zone.
Yeah. They're enabling the American holiday fireworks probably because they have no capacity to go out and enforce them.
That was Melissa or
Lisa or Melissa would have sent it.
Yeah.
Grants, search grants, and it'll come out as grants at rdck.ca and click that minus right.
Yeah, I had an email on that, so we responded this afternoon. So we are, since I reordered our agenda.
Yeah, jump.
Let's go to the West Creston Fire Hall.
4.
Oh,
that's you.
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to bring up West Creston Fire Hall has been approved for the referendum. We had an open house last week. A number of members of the public came in. I want to thank the staff for being very well prepared in their presentation. The fire staff, you have our CFO, was able to answer a lot of questions. Again, thanks to the staff because we created a web page for West Creston for the residents to go and get the latest information around the referendum, which is scheduled for tentatively in September. Some of the takeaways from that meeting are being addressed, which is more along the lines of communication, to which we would use the website again for that. And then we'll be doing some touch point communications as we get closer to the referendum. There's a large number of people in the area that just are not familiar and will not be familiar with the impact of that decision unless we actually reach out and touch them softly with a rubber mallet to become invested in that decision making. But one of the points that has been touched on, and the reason I'm bringing this forward additionally to the board is our relationship with our Yakanuki friends. It's not clear as to how they would wish to participate in this asset in the community, which will serve them greatly, particularly with their wellness center. And I guess I would kind of, before I get into any other suggestions, I would look to the CAO to perhaps suggest how we can understand where Yakanuki's input is and what their hope and expectation is with this fire hall and potential contribution to the capital. That said,
through the chair, we've had a number of discussions with staff over the years as the fire hall was being built, sort of slowed as construction slowed, but they were very willing to put in a contribution in exchange for service delivery, and their interest has definitely increased with the announcement of their new center that's opening up in that fire protection area. So because it's on this side of the river, or sorry, the other side of the river, it's not part of the agreement they have with the Canyon Lister Department. So they are looking for fire protection there. So should the referendum fail, I believe it would be quite costly for them from a fire suppression standpoint on that building. So I think it just depends as to whether or not you want to do something from the political side and engage chief and council, or if you want me to re-engage with staff and bring something back to yourself, board, CDSC, with respect to what an agreement might look like for a contribution to the hall bill.
through the chair. So I think that I have no problem politically getting involved in this. I think it's an important subject to discuss with them. But if we do have inroads through the staff, channels of the staff, to me, it's the most efficient way of understanding what their participation would be. My understanding is there was a commitment of X amount of dollars way back when from a previous director. Well, that was when the fire hall cost was this. Well, now the fire hall cost is that. So then that contribution also needs to be talked about in larger terms. And so there's two things. There is the asset financial contribution or services agreement. Services agreement, I don't think is as effective as a capital investment into that structure. So maybe that strategy we could talk about offline a little bit. But I guess I'm bringing this forward because we're into July and September referendum. We don't have a lot of time. We need to understand where Yakinuki sit and what side of the fence they sit on and how important it is to them. So I would just suggest whatever you would suggest, and I'm good with, but I have no problem sitting down with on a political side, have those conversations.
So through the chair, I can reach out to Heather Suddy and restart the conversations. And if I get indication from them that it might require some more council input, then I can reach out to you, Director Vandenberg.
Director Jackson?
Yeah, this brings to mind some years back, window box lumber was excluded from the window Lakeview fire protection area by will of the patriarchal family order of the day, I would say. They would just say, nope, you're not going to tax us, we're out. And then years later, as their insurance costs went up, I was approached by Martin Black and Robertson Insurance out of Kamloops, and they said, we'll give you a one-time payment of $50,000, give us fire coverage. And I said to them, why would we do that? You have no understanding of how much it costs to run a fire service. And of course, you do understand how much money they will save in terms of insurance, grief. And so have we ever looked at that? Because the difficulty is if you bring someone in under a fire service based on taxation, it's pretty clear what they pay and what they get. Whereas if you bring something in that's not part of the conventional tax roll, there's a whole different calculation, I'm sure. Yes, it would be a fair payment. But payment over time, that does make sense. Now, you could say that payment over time, 20 years, say, you project, would have a present value of X and make that a one-time upfront value, dollar amount rather. But I think you need to have that calculation. And someone's done it, I'm sure, in East Kootenay, outside of the district of Invermere. They'd be providing fire protection for the Upper Columbia Valley, for the Shuswap band up there. There's a few examples, I'm sure, where they have, other than their own contracts, that they've come up with some kind of an assessment, some kind of long-term benefit, some kind of fair portion of payment that everyone else is paying, have that service in place, ready to go. And then maybe just do a present value calculation of that and say, yeah, you can give us all up front. Maybe you get a 20% bonus reduction because you give us the money up front. I don't know. But without that calculation, it is entirely arbitrary. And is it beneficial or not to go to the public with an entirely arbitrary number? I just can see that raising more questions than it's worth. I mean, you could establish the fire service, here's the cost, vote on it, yes or no, and subsequently you will work in an agreement to extend the service to another organization that's excluded, like happened with window box and lumber. That's clean. The taxpayers know this is what it's going to cost you, and it doesn't cover them, and we'll have a negotiation later. But I hate to see you go up with an arbitrary number. This doesn't make sense. You have to let taxpayers know what's fair and why you think it's fair. Now, it's a lot more work for someone like Stuart if he's going to go to East Kootenay or other places. Did they assess those? Yeah. They have big money development in East Kootenay. We're not talking a couple little buildings. It's standard.
Yeah, and through the chair, they're not assessed through BC assessment if they're on reserve land.
No, it's separate.
So it's, even with Canyon Lister, it's been based off a calculation that has been somewhat of an estimate.
Yeah.
To try to get that fair market or the fair value of that. But we can do some of these preliminary calculations to get at least comfortable around a number, and I can run that by you.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Okay.
For that, Chair.
And so our next agenda item is the action items list. Anything anybody wants to bring forward there?
Are we good with item one, that we understand now that we don't have a policy? Yes, that's the problem. We don't have a policy on documentation for this budget process. I guess are we close to that?
Through the chair, I'd have to check with Mike to see where this sits on his list. Because the chair, it is tough. We are getting a few questions from different directors, and they're looking for a different level of documentation and desire from societies. So it's, I don't think it's any different than, I believe Director Jackman, you might have been the only one at the table last time we talked about financial service grant documentation, and one director wanted to have an audit for every single society that received financial service.
Minimum $500.
Exactly, or upwards, depending on the size of the group, maybe $5,000. And where's that money going to come from? They're going to ask for an increase in their financial service grant to be able to fund that audit. So it just ends up being that circular cash flow. So definitely something that I think we've got to do a little bit of work around scoping where the sweet spot is for these groups. But that does not mean that going into this budget session, you as CBSC could request further documentation from the groups that are part of your services, be it cemetery, reading centers, library and museum seem to be relatively good with what they bring forward to you. But some of the other groups that you've had questions on, we could definitely, from this sub-region, say we'll send them a letter when they're requested to come to the committee and ask them for things that they might not have been asked in the past that you're interested in having. And we can have that discussion at the August or September CBSC meeting to scope out what you're interested in asking them for.
Oh, that's going to bring up a different one.
Bill, go ahead.
Okay, well, and then on item 3, we're only going to bring it up right now. It's ongoing. This is traditional use study. Have a little bit of a conversation about where those values mesh with trying to provide, in my mind, respectful, focused public access to water, so we don't see trailers and tents and whatnot springing up all along the lake, and people have a party for a weekend, go and leave their mess, which is, again, go for a little drive. I'll show you where they're sitting right now. So I'm kind of bringing it up right now because maybe I'm a little bit insensitive, but Stuart gave me a call, said, I'm referred to in Facebook and about this and that, and compliments of your area director, such and such on Martel Beach. Not complimentary. And I told Stuart, I'm not too sensitive to that stuff. I'm not going to track Facebook. If someone wants to talk to me, come talk to me face to face or put your name down in an email, very clear. We'll have a written conversation, but I'm not responding to that. But they threw Yakanuki in the mix. And probably, I'm going to speculate, totally out of ignorance, that they don't quite understand the underlying issues with lake access at one point versus another. What's the difference? Is there a difference? Yes. Why is it viewed different? So we, again, have kind of put this off. It's nebulous. It says here something might happen July 6th, 2023, for just short of a year, 2 days short of a year long. But we need to schedule something. I don't know if there's any reaction from Yakanuki. Maybe they did the same thing as I did, said somebody's venting, and personally, I'm not going to put any effort into it, except maybe to talk to my colleagues here. Can the public understand this traditional use study? Do we understand it? And are we going to go any further down the path of any of these sites? And, engagement, Yakanuki and us, and then public. Is there something to be done here? I'd ask, of course, because Joe's here. You wishing you didn't come now.
No. And Mark's here is,
okay.
Mark's listening.
Just before we walk away from that one, move on, that's directly related to item 6 as well. And I do think that some more communication needs to be done there because things haven't worked out the way we desired them to. I think it may require a little more consultation with all the parties involved, but to remove the toilets and the garbage receptacles at a time of potential peak usage is very unproductive. And I think it needs to be revisited so that we can perhaps come to an agreement that they remain there while we're doing the other conversations, because taking them away now is not in the best interest of the environment or any of the issues that we talked about with Martel Beach. So I'm just wondering if that can revisit that and perhaps communicate with all parties, because one of the parties says that they are not in favor of removing the bathrooms. And if they say that, then I think the other parties should come together and say, well, let's put them back.
But Chair, if I can.
Yeah.
Their license of occupation expired and there was no path for them and no clear path for us. And the money Area A had recommended, approved to support the pumping and dump the garbage, ran out. And I got lots of heads up and I didn't recommend any more money towards that. So you can't leave it there and have it overflow. So they pretty well had to pull it. So unless somebody comes up with money and another license, I don't think our staff can do anything. We can't just put it back.
Through the chair, you could, I think this is, so my question, are you comfortable with us going and having a conversation with the Yakanuki and bringing something back? Or do you want, so that's one thing, like, we have our contacts, so we can do that path. Or it's a political piece, and it would be an invitation from maybe the mayor and the chair of the regional district to have a political conversation with certain topics. But we just need to know that that you'd be fine with us going and having that conversation.
That's why I would start with item 3, not 6. It's got to be more broad. The whole concept of traditional use, the more sensitive and the less sensitive areas, people are going to be inherently in the same spot today that they were 2,000 years ago, more or less. I shouldn't say, 2, because the lake level was higher 4,000 years ago, but it's been kind of where it is now the last 1,000 or 2 years. They're going to be there for the exact same reason then as now, because your kids are fairly safe. You're not too worried about, what's going on around you. There's whatever you need to have a pleasant stay, whether you camp there, or where they just visit there. So those hot spots, those sensitive spots are going to be common to humans. That's just how we are. You don't want to go to the dangerous cliffs unless the kids that I know have been jumping off the rocks at Great Creek. And injuries and death have happened there. And I get to say exactly who would have been to the funeral. We have a common interest in using the spots that have traditionally been used. And if we can focus respectful use of those spots of common interest, that's where I want to start. The whole reason they were traditionally used is because they are the best places to focus for respectful use. Now, if you don't dig holes, and you don't disturb artifacts, and you don't do other things, that's where I'd like the conversation to start. Low impact, common, respectful use, as opposed to just picking one spot. Because if you try and pick one spot, it's going to spread to all the other conversations. So why don't we just start with the conversation? What does this traditional use study point to? And what it points to is the places people used traditionally 1,000 and 2,000 years ago are the best places for humans to be, probably, if we're going to be anywhere. I'd like to start with that conversation. And if I'm wrong, explain to me why. Why is that assumption wrong?
Dr. Ranford.
So further to Gary's point and this conversation, I'm not clear, Gary, if you're suggesting that the staff ought to, through their channel, resurrect that conversation or continue that conversation, or if it's better served at a chair and mayor level. I'm not so clear on that, but this does roll into item 11. And we've asked for quite some time to set up an opportunity to discuss with the authors of the TUS, the traditional study, so that we can better understand where they got to, what they got to, and how that will impact our conversations going forward. So, I see it, this is September 2023 direction, and I haven't heard, this is a huge opportunity. And I know that there are some people in our residence area that are bringing this up because they're not clear as to how this thing happened, why it happened, and who, and in fact, who was the author of it. And but we've pointed out that there's a huge opportunity for us to sit down and visit with them to discuss this report, but it's not happening. That will form a basis to a lot of our conversations that we're having today as well, just having that better understanding to decide whether or not Joe's staff ought to go in this direction or whether we need to have a different level of conversation.
Chair, if I could. Okay, so you're right, they're all interrelated. I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit, but item 3 is that Joe and his staff come back to us about, to me, what makes sense. Those recommendations based on their experience. You've got parks and lake access and highly and not highly developed points all around the regional district, plus you're aware of what's going on everywhere else, including provincial parks. So the starting point is what makes sense? Why are people there today? Let's go to Martel right now. There'll be some vehicles there. There's spots you will always see vehicles. There's spots near the glass house immediately north. You will always see vehicles. There's a reason why. It's partially sheltered by Blue Point or Columbia Point there. It's not so nasty for waves. And it's not blocked by public ownership. And you see people all the time at certain spots. If we knew, like I asked Mark, and he's on here, I guess, as Joe said, we knew there were, 7 spots we identified. People are all the time. And we said, well, let's work around these, see what makes sense to develop. Develop's the wrong word, maybe, to try and concentrate respectful use of water access. So I think item 3 says, let's revisit that, knowing what the traditional use study says, and be certain as a regional district whether we think it's even worth venturing down in the path of any of these. And then next we would take that to Yakanuki and say, here's why we think maybe the regional district would be a partner or a steward of this focused, respectful use of water access. I asked for power line beach to be looked at, knowing it was difficult. And there's raves and parties, not accessible. The owners of the gated community to the south weren't amenable to us when they were subdividing, getting a better access that was physically, didn't have to tumble down Maple side. And so if we took that on as regional district, we'd have continuous calls for bylaw enforcement. So I'd like to see out of the site, staff's opinion, is that one we should even ever look at? But would we support Yakanuki? Because they're right across the water at Ainsworth, having that as an educational site, because that's what the temporary traditional use study told me, was that had meaning and importance as an educational site. So that site, yeah, let's help them not encourage raves, which people are afraid of because it's straight up the hill and you light a fire, it'll burn right up. Is there a role for us on that site? And then let's take along all the rest of it and have sort of collectively our own conversation based on staff's knowledge. What makes sense over the next decade to pursue? Me, I still think Martell makes sense to pursue. I think Powerline does not make sense. The other ones, you guys have an opinion. That's, to me, what item 3 says. Then we would maybe go to item 11 and have a bigger conversation. Are we going to try and focus respectful use of water access, or just leave it the way it is? Because the way it is, there's trash and toilet paper left along the beach every time the weekend rolls around. So I don't know what order we do this in. I'm just I know Joe's staff have a lot of good thoughts in their head, and to me, that's what item 3 they would tell us what their good thoughts are.
Well, my feeling is that item 6 is part of a different discussion, because if we're going to wait for all this time to hammer out an agreement, people are still using the beach as a bathroom and throwing garbage in there. I really think that the first step should be to see if we can have the permit reinstated to Modi, and then whether we decide to provide funding after we have a permit reinstated is a decision for the directors. But again, when we have garbage receptacles in, now they're removed and the beach is going to be ruined because people don't have an actual bathroom. I think that's a more urgent situation, and one that I think we could have with the interested parties. And if if it's a firm no, well, too bad, we tried. My indication is it's not a firm no, and it's a very important discussion, because next week that beach is going to be packed with people, and a lot of people will be disappointed with what they step on that beach, where we actually had prevented that for a while. So I just think that's a more urgent, a more pertinent conversation, and it shows respect for the actual piece of land that people are on. And it just bothers me that we can't get past that simple issue of let's try to get that permit reinstated, have an agreement from the parties that are there, so that people can enjoy the beach, because we haven't stopped anybody from going there. They're going to go there. There's an actual access road where they can park there. And unless you actually effectively close that road and say the beach closed to everybody, we haven't accomplished anything. So that's different from the traditional use study. And it's a way to protect the environment and actually protect people's health. And I think it's a much more important short-term conversation. And again, if a permit is reinstated, we can discuss funding again. But without a permit, there's no need to fund it, but people still use it. So it bugs me that we're trying to group everything in one overall conversation that could take a decade, when something like this should not take a decade. It should take a week. Director Vandenberg.
Well, I am definitely in alignment with Director Jackman's consideration or thought around the strategy of putting effort into number 3 and then moving on to 11. That is to me, a medium-term opportunity. But I do agree with you on item 6. That is a short-term, must be looked at. And in our notes here, it says complete. Well, the status, it's not complete. So we are going to reactivate it. And I think that there's some effort that needs to be an opportunity to talk with the ministry and say whether.
He's got an answer to that, I think.
Well, the first issue was Modi offered a 1-year license of occupation because they could circumvent referral to Indigenous groups. So our staff have already done most of that work through a kind of an informal process by doing the traditional use study. We've highlighted most of the issues. So if Modi's allowed to issue another 1 year, not an extension because it's expired, that old permit, But a new 1-year permit to the regional district, well, that's staff time and work plan. It's got to be something that's going to take more than a few minutes. But if staff were to get a 1-year license of occupation, I bet you if you went and talked to that area A director guy, he'd probably put a discretionary grant out pretty quick and say, yeah, we will fund, because it's useless to put a toilet in the trash can unless you're going to fund it. You probably find funding for a year is pretty easy because that's pretty important to area A residents and beyond. But staff need to do that, get that license of occupation, and I'd be afraid if we go for a 5-year license of occupation, it's going to take the whole summer. So this is a big question mark. Is there such a thing as a quick turnaround on a 1-year license of occupation? I understand we're trying to do something with a bridge and not take 5 years. So.
Through the chair, I think that although, sorry, just let me look at 11 is important. But I think that 3 and 6 might step in front of 11 on this work plan in terms of the order. I do think 3 is number 1. And the reason I think 3 is number 1 is that from my discussions with Heather Suddy over the years and Curtis and Yakinuki in general, if you're going to talk to them about Martel Beach specifically, one project, one issue, immediately the perception is you're only doing it for yourself. If you go to them and talk about the traditional use study and all the parks as a whole, you're talking about the bigger picture, the relationship, how you want to organize the stewardship of these areas in partnership with them and how they see this rolling out. And it's much more respectful to approach it that way, whether it's staff or at the political level. So if you wanted Joe and his team to start with that TUS side, that's great. Make Martel maybe the first one you talk about, but talk about the whole TUS to start with and get that sound foundation down to say, look, we've done a regional look and here's how we want more information on approaching things. But that's the way that I would suggest going after it, whether it's political or staff, entirely up to yourselves. But I would start with that bigger TUS picture. And then if you want to get into discussion around Martel Beach as a call it a case study, call it a first step, then that would be the next step.
So that which the CAO has just pointed out is the reasonable action. I think we ought to give that some credibility. I wonder, as an aside somewhat, the TUS, that kind of conversation, when I consider the Kootenay Lake Partnership, I don't think that TUS study is embossed or implemented into that KLP conversation. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity that it ought to be.
I sent it, sorry, Chair. I sent it to Claire for information. I don't know if Mark or anyone or Joe had a chance to talk to them. Like we went to them for information as an aside.
Through the chair, it was given to KLP and to the people there so that they were to hold it. So they could use it as they needed to use the information.
Okay. That was an aside.
So Stu, I think we'll use that as your suggestion as a guidance staff. Because it does make a lot of sense and it's, we just want to see this progress because we feel that we've had step by step along the way, but then we don't see the progress that we hope. And of course, we have to engage the other parties in this, but we would really like to see that progress so that we don't come up with these sort of what is a temporary issue is the fact that it is heavily used and not respected. And so we can just make that conversation. And again, have Martel Beach as a sort of one of the first items to address there. I think we're doing what we need to do, and hopefully showing the public that we're doing what we need to do to move this forward, because they're the users and they're the ones that have the biggest concerns when these places are abused. So.
Mark put his hand up.
Mark, did you have something to say to this?
Yeah, great conversation. I just digging. I have my computer in front of me, so I'm able to dig through previous reports. But we did present as staff a prioritization report of the TUS sites. So we went through different methods. We reviewed the TUS. We reviewed the recreation master plan, demand criteria. That was sort of things that we know that the public is interested in, from walking trails to sports field. We rated those things, and we looked at the prioritization criteria of outdoor activities in the master plan as well. We scored those, and we did come back to the commission with recommendations for what sites from the TUS to look at. And just as a reminder, in the TUS, the Martel Beach, just because it's a good topic of discussion, was not recommended for regional park development. So in this report, we actually identified that Martel Beach requires an alternate path. And right now, I don't want to say we don't know what that is, but it may involve a toilet, it may involve garbage cans, it may involve delivery of those mechanisms by others. But it was very clear in the TUS that regional park development was not recommended. So as a result, we did recommend moving forward with taking a look at Goat River South, which has complications as well. West Creston Ferry Landing, those were the two top priorities for regional park development in 2024. So that has been the focus of staff's time at this point. So one option may be to bring this report back to the commission just as a refresher, and then see where we need to take it. Maybe we need to have more conversations with Lower Kootenay Band and Yakanuki. Maybe we need to explore what a possible alternate path forward would be from Martel Beach. But this could be the starting point that I think Stu was alluding to, that we could bring back to the commission as a refresher.
Yeah, no, we're agreed, I think, on that. So thanks for your input. Director Vandenberg.
The only other item on the action list that I would like to just direct a little bit of attention to, and it was prompted by the tennis club coming today, who wanted to make a presentation. Of course, they were too late to be able to do so. Is on item 5. It's the process for feasibility studies for clubs and groups to submit proposals for us to consider. I know that alongside the tennis club, but you're going to have the pickleball group community as well are going to be in this room quite shortly. And I think to have this format, I don't know where the format is at. That is just the process and requirements that these groups can follow a checklist along, so that when they do sit down in front of us, it's a worthwhile conversation, that they have a number of things in order before they decide to come. And when they do come, we can be very diligent in asking qualified questions. So just kind of curious where that process is at for those groups to be able to utilize.
Through the chair, the commitment there was we have not done is to sit down with you to go through what the process is in the master plan and to check if that's still valid. So we've done that recent work with the Nelson Commission, which actually used this work here as the basis for their work. So sorry, that's for the main.
Also, earlier there was the representative of the baseball field users as well, and they weren't on the agenda, so they would like to come back to the next meeting and be on the agenda. So again, now we got 3 groups that are kind of asking the same thing, and we haven't done the step that you just mentioned. So I think that we're going to have to move that forward faster, because we're getting more and more requests that we have to respond to it. And so, I mean, you have to through us, and so it's continuing down that path. And then I think since we haven't done a workshop or haven't worked on that enough, I think we need to address and find sooner rather than later.
And just through the chair, just so you understand, we've spent a tremendous amount of time on work for this commission. Yeah. A tremendous amount of time.
And we thank you for it.
Yeah. And it's, whether it be and we're about to find some more time that we.
And we're your favorite guest for time.
Yeah, you are our favorite.
Who's online right now? Director Page is online, is he?
Yeah. Everybody wants to become more like this table. So it is, and it is right now, we are very overwhelmed with the number of things, whether it be at a number of different tables. So we have 3 major projects on the go right now. We've got Castlegar engagement, we've got Nelson engagement that's about to start, and we're in the middle of the parks regional strategy. And we are trying to juggle a number of things. What I will do, I'm going to circulate the work that Tricia did in Nelson, and just provide you that section of the recreation master plan. I think you'll see how it all fits together.
Okay.
I just want, and now that I'm assuming the action discussion is over, I just want to caution the committee around that this was a 37-minute discussion around items that, although they were on the agenda in an action list, they weren't identified as discussion items in the agenda. And I think that it's kind of towing a line on letting the public know what you're going to be talking about versus what's on the agenda for information. And I don't know how to best deal with that, because you get the action item list and something might come up, tweak your interest over the next couple of days. Maybe it's something where we throw a quick addenda out the night before, so we can at least put it on the website, and we get input from the directors to say, I want to make sure this is pulled for discussion at the meeting tomorrow after you get a chance. I don't know how we do that. I'm just, I'm brainstorming and talking out loud here, so we're thinking out loud. But I just want to make sure that we're being transparent enough that if the public knows that you want to talk about the TUS, it's flagged, and they can show up if they're interested in hearing you talk about the TUS.
And I'm all for that and that preparation, but I will, and Rob and I already had this conversation, this agenda package must roll out a lot sooner. In order for us to help in that regard and prepare, which I'm fully prepared and able to do, I must have this information in much more in advance than a day and a half. And that's a struggle. It's been a struggle with this committee. Because we're talking multiple hours here, talking about stuff that's extremely important. But I think it would go faster if we were a little bit more prepared. Just a caveat to your suggestion.
I think, Stuart, you'll know I had a plan to flag this without any advance warning because of conversation, Facebook type stuff. So I don't know how to deal with that. But the fact that me being named, as I said in Facebook, can't say I don't care, but I don't care that much. But I didn't like to see that Nuki's name without people understanding what's going on. And to me, it seems we left too many loose threads. But you're absolutely right. I guess when I said in my mind, something we'll talk about next week, I told myself I really should have, even if it was an addendum item, said, let's flag this because I don't know, it's disappeared. Or is it still going around on social media? But that's why I flagged it. I could have done it better, much better. Yeah.
Through the chair, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to know if you were okay with us approaching that. Yeah. There's really 3 parties. There's us. Sorry, 4 parties. Yeah. There's us, Ministry of Transportation, who is the owner of the site, who we have a very good working relationship with, the local band, Kanuki, and the nation. The TUS is owned by the nation. So, and sometimes it's different input. Or I should even say that different points of view, different priorities. So, and I do want to just point to a good thing about no more excuses in there anymore. But the TUS in our issues at Crawford Creek, it got actually approval from the nation for the work issue at Rock Creek. It's not the nation, it's the province. So the TUS expedited.
Yeah, I'd really like to move us on. It's public time, and I know you've been very patient through all this. And so, did you have a question or concern?
Yeah, so the last meeting, May 30th, it was stated regarding the Goat River discussion that there was going to be a media release to the public of the email that was read out loud. I personally haven't seen any media release, and so that greatly affects me directly. Your staff had direction that you were going to schedule a meeting with Ministry of Transportation regarding this media release. Since then, there's been barriers and no trespassing signage and gates put up. It's clearly that site also is in the TUS report. That alone is not actually stating facts of the land. Is there going to be a media release about that email to the public? Because again, people do post on social media absolute false claims of the use of the land, what they're able to do. The public's confused.
You have an answer for that? Because
Through the chair, that's all of those are commitments from the Ministry of Transportation, not for us.
Yeah, I'm not sure if
we could reach out to the ministry.
Yeah, we obviously need to.
I can't speak for the ministry.
Yeah, because the information that they provided to this meeting was their information, and so in the media, to the media, it should be them providing that. We don't speak for another agency, so we'll have to reiterate the importance of that to them because the response to us was their information. So we would like to see that everybody see that as it was read aloud here. Because that's the information that is pertinent to that piece of property.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's a gravel pit, an industrial site. It's not a recreational site. And also the dike too. So the Goat River Residency Association, that was also mentioned at the last meeting. With all this new talk about reopening the task report and speaking to whomever you need to do that with. What about the stakeholders? That was mentioned too on the 30th. That stakeholders would be informed of anything of that topic, which would be me personally and the Goat River Residency Association.
But you do know from what was the information provided at the last meeting, people wish to walk through the property on the public right of way. They are allowed to do that, and so because of that, they can walk right to the industrial site if they want to. What they choose to do after that is, and how Modi wishes to respond to them doing that is a decision they have to make. But people are allowed to walk along that right of way at least that far, and so. That part that's what they made clear, as well as what they haven't made clear is what their desire is for people if they choose to walk further into that, what they call an industrial site. So I'm not sure how clear they will be on that. I guess we'll leave that up to them. But
they have been clear. It's an industrial site. It's not for recreational use. It's not to be used as that. They don't condone that. It's been said.
But it's what they're prepared to do if people continue to go down there, which probably is an issue because if people still choose to walk there and they say it's in an industrial site, what efforts are they going to put forward to ensure that people don't go there? Or I guess the question how much do they care whether people walk there or not? And that's something that they haven't said to you or they haven't said to us. So I'm not sure what sort of clarity you get from them on that, but that's the issue that you're talking about today is if people want to walk along the right of way through your property, if all they did was walk there and turn right around and respect your property, you're not causing anybody a problem. Whether it's a problem or whether they go past that is a decision Modi has to make.
Yeah, and the signage makes it pretty clear. And on top of that, it ain't just Modi. You're really leaving out the jurisdiction of the Dike district. The Dike, all along those two properties, my property and Modi's, the gravel pit, it's all protected by the Dike. And so that's a whole other jurisdiction. So that needs to be, it's very important that that is not being left out.
All right, so through the chair, maybe the little bit of confusion is that the regional district can't speak on behalf of the Diking district, nor can it speak on behalf of Modi. If there's problems with the way the Modi site is being used, that's an issue for Modi to address. If there's an issue with how the dike is being used, that's an issue for the Diking district to address. It's wrapped up, it definitely is wrapped up in this little bit of this confusion about looking, like that site has been looked at by rec sites and trails as a potential target number, I guess it's probably a decade ago now. And it's been in discussions because we do know that the community uses it, but how the community is using it presently right now is up to the Ministry of Transportation to enforce and regulate. And if there's issues of people using the dike in a way that the Diking Authority doesn't want that used, then that's an issue for them to determine. Like that's completely in their realm to regulate. What we were asked to do as staff was to look and see, is there potential of that as a park? The TUS doesn't, the fact that there was a traditional use study on it doesn't make it a park. It doesn't condone its use as a park. It just says, if we were to do it, these are the considerations we would have to take. So right now, it's not a regional district park. Regional district hasn't claimed it as a park in any way, shape, or fashion. It's still under the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, and then the dike is under the Diking Authority. So that's just from point of view, we don't have any authority to speak on it or to suggest how the public, what an individual does, because that's the ministry. That's how the ministry is done through their signage. The ministry has a number of sites like this around the Kootenays you can imagine. I know of the public using a gravel site in Balfour that happens to be right adjacent to a regional park. And the ministry manages that use and handles those complaints, and we deal with the part that's on the regional park parcel. So those things are always a little bit of a back and forth. We try to let them know if there's something that we're seeing, but it's up to them to deal with their issues. So I don't want it to seem like a cop-out. It's just that I can't physically, we can't do anything about that. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. No. It's just that area is being promoted through RBCK, through the website, on lots of meetings. The traditional use study report is tagged or linked. And then, so what the public is seeing are these links, and then, or they're seeing these potential parks and already assuming and using them as causes a lot of problems down specifically where we're at. The amount of traffic litter, people starting fires, dogs off leash, hundreds of dogs, like the amount of problems that actually came from that. It gave a false sense to people thinking and spreading stuff around the community that it's an actual recreation site when it's not.
Yes, I think what people say and there's nothing on our website that says it's a regional park. Like, there's no communications that we're doing that is saying or suggesting. We have, like, all of those studies are public, so we make them public so they can be seen and be transparent. How people manipulate that information, very difficult for us to control. And so, I think that's why the ministry has put up that signage there. If there's continued issues, like, I would just encourage that you let the ministry know that there's issue on their property.
Yeah, there's lots of.
Yeah, and I can understand how that's concerning.
Yeah, and then the Photo Residency Association too has signage coming for to let the public know that it's not for recreational use. So there is signage.
Okay, we're gonna have to move to a closed meeting now, so I appreciate your patience.
Thank you.
Hold on, meeting.